R/petty revenge coworker stole my ideas for promotion, so I destroyed her career. Title: R/petty revenge coworker stole my ideas for promotion, so I destroyed her career. I was literally shaking as I stood outside the conference room, watching through the glass walls as Jessica clicked through MY PowerPoint slides, presenting MY nostalgic millennial campaign concept to the Hartwell Industries executives like she'd birthed the idea herself. The same campaign I'd stayed up until 3 a.m. perfecting just 2 weeks ago. The same campaign I'd foolishly shared with her during our brainstorming session. "Sarah, you okay?" My cubicle neighbor Marcus appeared beside me, following my death glare through the glass. "You look like you're about to spontaneously combust." I couldn't even respond. Jessica was now explaining MY consumer psychology research about how millennial parents respond to brands that trigger childhood memories. She was using MY exact phrasing, down to the joke about how we're all just grown-ups seeking the comfort of Saturday morning cartoons. The executives were eating it up, nodding and scribbling notes like she was some kind of marketing genius. 3 years. 3 fucking years I've been grinding at Morrison & Associates, living off ramen and false hope, watching less qualified people leapfrog over me while I did the actual work. My student loan debt was climbing towards 6 figures, my studio apartment had a suspicious stain on the ceiling that my landlord refused to fix, and my dating life was non-existent because I spent every weekend working on campaigns that apparently weren't good enough to get me promoted. Until now. Until Jessica fucking Martinez decided to make my work her golden ticket. "She's presenting your Hartwell pitch," Marcus said quietly. It wasn't a question. Marcus had been here longer than anyone and had developed a sixth sense for office politics and professional backstabbing. Word for word, I managed to croak out, my throat tight with rage and disbelief. The worst part? This wasn't even the first time. Looking back now with crystal clarity, I could see the pattern. The collaborative coffee meetings where Jessica would pick my brain about strategy. The casual questions about my research methods. The way she'd suddenly have brilliant insights right after our conversations. I'd been so naive, so fucking trusting, thinking we were actually friends. Thinking that sharing ideas was what good colleagues did. But this Hartwell campaign was different. This was a big league client presentation that could make or break careers. This was supposed to be MY moment to prove I deserved the senior creative director position that opened up last month. The position that came with a $30,000 salary bump and actual creative control over major accounts. The position I'd been unofficially promised by our boss, David, after I'd successfully handled the nightmare that was the Zenith Electronics rebrand. Jessica finished her presentation to thunderous applause. Actual applause. For MY work. The Hartwell executives were practically glowing as they shook her hand and praised her innovative approach and fresh perspective. David was beaming at her like a proud parent, and I could already see the promotion committee meeting playing out in his head. As the conference room emptied, Jessica caught sight of me through the glass. For just a split second, her triumphant smile faltered. She knew. She absolutely knew what she'd done, and she knew that I knew. But then her mask slipped back into place, and she had the audacity to wave at me with her perfectly manicured nails like we were still buddies. That's when I made the decision that would change both of our careers forever. "Game on, Jessica. You have no idea who you just fucked with." I forced myself to smile and wave back as Jessica strutted out of the conference room like she owned the place. My face felt like it might crack from the effort, but I needed her to think everything was normal. That I was still the same naive little doormat who'd been feeding her career for months without realizing it. "Sarah." David's voice boomed across the hallway as he approached, still buzzing with excitement from the presentation. "Did you catch Jessica's pitch in there? Absolutely brilliant stuff. That nostalgic marketing angle could revolutionize how we approach the millennial parent demographic." I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded enthusiastically. "She's really something special." "She certainly is. Listen, I hate to pile more work on you, but I need you to help Jessica prep for the follow-up presentation next week. The Hartwell executives want to see a full campaign rollout, social media strategy, influencer partnerships, the whole 9 yards. Think you could assist her with the research and data analysis?" The irony was so thick I could choke on it. He wanted me to help expand MY own stolen campaign so Jessica could seal the deal on her inevitable promotion. But as I stood there, watching David's expectant face, a beautiful, terrible plan began forming in my mind. "Of course," I said, probably a little too eagerly. "I'd love to help Jessica succeed." David beamed. "This is why you're such a valuable team player, Sarah. Jessica's lucky to have someone with your attention to detail supporting her." As he walked away, I caught Jessica watching me from across the office. She looked nervous now, probably wondering if I was going to cause a scene or run crying to HR. But I just gave her another friendly wave and headed back to my desk. I needed information. Lots of it. First stop, Jessica's personnel file. Being friends with Marcy in HR had its advantages, especially when she left her computer unlocked during lunch breaks. 5 minutes of casual snooping while pretending to chat about weekend plans gave me everything I needed. Jessica's resume was interesting. Apparently, she graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a master's in marketing analytics. She'd also claimed experience with 3 major campaigns at her previous agency that had increased client revenue by 200%. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. Northwestern's registrar office was surprisingly helpful once I explained I was verifying academic credentials for a potential partnership opportunity. Jessica Martinez had indeed graduated from Northwestern. With a 2.8 GPA. In communications. No master's degree in sight. Strike one. Her previous agency, Blackstone Creative, was even more enlightening. After 20 minutes of being transferred around, I finally reached someone who remembered Jessica. "Oh, Jess." The woman laughed. "Yeah, she was here for about 8 months. Sweet girl, but honestly, she was more of a coordinator role. Definitely wasn't leading any major campaigns. She mostly handled scheduling and client lunches. Strike two. But it was the third call that made my hands start trembling with anticipation. Jessica's biggest professional claim to fame was supposedly creating the award-winning Urban Roots campaign for a sustainable fashion brand. Except when I called Urban Roots directly, their marketing director had never heard of Jessica Martinez. "Our Urban Roots campaign was actually developed by our in-house team in Thompson & Associates," she explained. "Are you sure you have the right person?" Strike three, bitch. I leaned back in my chair, staring at my notes. Jessica hadn't just stolen my ideas, she'd built her entire career on lies. And now I had 2 weeks to figure out exactly how to burn it all down while she presented my work to the most important client our agency had ever landed. This was going to be even more satisfying than I'd imagined. The next morning, I walked into the office with a grande coffee and my best poker face, ready to begin what I was already thinking of as Operation Career Suicide, Jessica's, not mine. I'd spent half the night researching and the other half fantasizing about various revenge scenarios, each more elaborate than the last. Sarah. Jessica's voice rang out the moment I sat down. She practically jogged over to my desk, designer heels clicking on the linoleum with urgent precision. David told me you're going to help with the Hartwell follow-up. That's so amazing of you. Her smile was blinding white and completely fake. Up close, I could see the tension around her eyes, the way her fingers fidgeted with her statement necklace. She was scared. Good. Of course. I'm just so excited to see where you take this brilliant concept, I gushed, laying it on thick enough to pave a driveway. I mean, that nostalgic marketing angle? Pure genius. How did you even think of it? Jessica's face went through several micro-expressions, guilt, panic, calculation, before settling back into her practiced confidence. You know how it is. Sometimes inspiration just strikes at the weirdest moments. I was actually eating cereal and watching Saturday morning cartoons when it hit me. I nearly choked on my coffee. That was literally the example I'd used in my original notes. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Well, whatever your process is, it's working, I said sweetly. So what do you need from me for the follow-up presentation? We spent the next hour going over the campaign expansion. Jessica had clearly done her homework since yesterday, probably staying up all night trying to understand the strategy well enough to discuss it intelligently. But every few minutes, she'd ask me to refresh her memory on some detail or double-check her thinking on the consumer psychology elements. It was like watching someone try to perform surgery based on a WebMD article. The beautiful part was that she had no choice but to keep involving me. The follow-up presentation was next Friday, just 8 days away, and Hartwell Industries wanted a comprehensive social media strategy, detailed analytics projections, and a full influencer partnership proposal. All things that required actual expertise, not just stolen PowerPoint slides. I'm thinking we should probably start with the social media demographics breakdown, Jessica said, scrolling through her laptop with the frantic energy of someone drowning in their own lies. You're so good with data analysis. Could you maybe put together some preliminary numbers? Absolutely, I agreed. But you know what might be helpful? If I could see your original research files. Just so I can make sure my analysis aligns with your vision. The color drained from Jessica's face. Oh, my research files? Yeah, you know, your consumer surveys, focus group data, demographic studies. The foundation work that led to this campaign concept. I kept my voice casual, like I was asking about the weather. I just want to make sure I'm building on the right framework. Right. Of course. Jessica was practically sweating now. The thing is, most of my research was collaborative. You know how brainstorming sessions work. Very organic, hard to pin down individual contributions. I nodded thoughtfully. Totally understand. Well, no worries. I can just start from scratch with new research. It'll probably take most of this week, but I'm sure David won't mind if we need to push back the presentation timeline a bit. No. Jessica's response was so sharp that Marcus looked over from his cubicle. She immediately tried to recover. I mean, no, we can't push it back. Hartwell was very specific about the timeline. Maybe we could work with whatever foundation data is available? Hook. Line. Sinker. You know what? I said, as if the idea had just occurred to me. Why don't we work on this together? I could come over to your place this weekend, and we could really dive deep into the strategy. Make sure everything is perfect. Jessica's smile looked like it was physically painful. That sounds perfect. Oh, it was going to be perfect, all right. Just not for her. That weekend couldn't come fast enough. I spent Friday evening preparing like I was heading into battle, which, honestly, I was. I printed out copies of Jessica's fabricated resume, the real academic records I'd obtained, and testimonials from her previous employers that painted a very different picture than her LinkedIn profile suggested. Everything went into a neat folder labeled Jessica's Greatest Hits, my own private joke. Saturday morning, I showed up at Jessica's apartment in Brooklyn with my laptop bag and enough coffee for both of us. Her place was exactly what I'd expected, trendy industrial loft that probably cost 3 times my rent, decorated with the kind of minimalist furniture you see in West Elm catalogs. Everything screamed I'm successful in that try-hard way that now made perfect sense. This place is gorgeous, I said, genuinely meaning it even though it made my blood boil. This was what my stolen work had paid for. Thanks. I got lucky with the lease, Jessica replied, which was probably another lie. She led me to her dining table, which she'd already set up as a workspace with notebooks, her laptop, and what looked like a desperate attempt at campaign research, printouts of my original presentation mixed with random marketing articles she'd clearly Googled that morning. We settled in, and I immediately went into helpful mode. Okay, so I've been thinking about the social media rollout. For the nostalgic millennial angle to really work, we need to identify the specific childhood touchstones that trigger the strongest emotional responses in our target demographic. Jessica nodded eagerly, pen poised over her notebook like a student trying not to fail a final exam. Right, absolutely. The touchstones. So walk me through your original research methodology, I continued innocently. How did you identify Saturday morning cartoons as the primary nostalgic trigger? The pen stopped moving. Well, it was more of an intuitive leap, you know? Sometimes the best insights come from gut feelings rather than formal research. I nearly laughed out loud. In my original research, I'd surveyed 200 millennials about childhood brand memories and spent 2 weeks analyzing the data. Saturday morning cartoons had emerged as the #1 nostalgia trigger in 73% of responses. But sure, Jessica's gut feeling had magically arrived at the same conclusion. That's interesting, I mused, pulling out my laptop. Because I did some additional research this week, and I found some data that might surprise you. I opened a spreadsheet that I'd spent hours perfecting, a completely fabricated set of focus group results that contradicted every major point in the original campaign. According to my fake data, millennials actually responded negatively to cartoon-based nostalgia, preferring music and fashion callbacks instead. Jessica's face went white as she stared at the numbers. This can't be right. I know, it shocked me too, I said sympathetically. It completely undermines the cartoon angle. I think we might need to pivot the entire campaign strategy. For the next hour, I watched Jessica spiral into complete panic as I systematically dismantled every element of the campaign with my fabricated research. She couldn't argue with the data because she had no idea what the real research actually showed. She couldn't defend the strategy because she didn't understand the psychology behind it. All she could do was nod along helplessly as I led her toward professional suicide. Maybe we should run this new direction by David on Monday, I suggested sweetly. I mean, it's a completely different campaign now, but at least it'll be based on solid research. No. Jessica's voice cracked. We can't completely change directions now. The presentation is Friday. Hartwell is expecting the nostalgic angle. But if the data shows it won't work. Fuck the data, she exploded, then immediately tried to backtrack. I mean, sometimes you have to trust your instincts over research. The original concept is strong. I know it is. There it was. The desperation I'd been waiting for. Jessica, I said gently, how can you be so sure? Jessica stared at me for what felt like an eternity, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to form words that wouldn't come. The question hung in the air between us, how can you be so sure? I could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she scrambled for an answer that wouldn't expose her. Finally, she forced a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. I mean, I've just put so much thought into this concept, you know? Sometimes when you've lived with an idea for so long, you develop an intuition about it. Lived with it for 2 weeks since you stole it from me, I thought, but kept my expression concerned and helpful. I get that, I said slowly, but David is going to ask about our research methodology. Hartwell Industries didn't become a billion-dollar company by ignoring data. They're going to want to see the numbers that support our strategy. Jessica's hands were actually shaking now as she reached for her coffee cup. Right, of course. The thing is, my original research files they're on my old laptop. Which crashed last week. Total hard drive failure. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. She was digging herself deeper with every lie. Oh no. Did you try data recovery? There are some great services that can. Already tried. Everything's gone. She waved her hand dismissively, but I caught the tremor in her voice. But honestly, Sarah, I think we're overthinking this. The presentation went perfectly on Thursday. The executives loved it. Why would we want to change a winning formula? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced down and felt my stomach drop into my shoes. Asterisk David, Sarah, need to chat Monday morning first thing. Something's come up with the Hartwell account. Don't mention this to Jessica yet. Asterisk. Jessica noticed my expression immediately. Everything okay? Yeah, just, my landlord being weird about rent, I lied, but my mind was racing. What could have come up with the Hartwell account? Had they somehow figured out that the campaign wasn't originally Jessica's? Or worse, had David discovered my background research into Jessica's credentials? I slipped my phone back into my pocket, but Jessica was still watching me with suspicious eyes. The dynamic in the room had shifted somehow, and I could feel her studying my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. You know what's funny? She said suddenly, her tone carefully casual. I was thinking about our conversation on Thursday, and I realized something. You seemed really familiar with the campaign details. Like, really familiar. My heart started pounding, but I kept my voice steady. Well, yeah. I've been working on similar demographic research for months. A lot of the consumer psychology overlaps with my other projects. Right. Jessica nodded slowly, but her eyes never left my face. It's just that some of your questions today were very specific. Like you already knew what the research should show. Shit. I'd been so focused on watching her squirm that I hadn't been careful enough about how much knowledge I was revealing. Jessica might be a lying, backstabbing plagiarist, but she wasn't stupid. I guess I'm just really passionate about this kind of work, I said with a nervous laugh. Maybe I should dial back the enthusiasm. Maybe. Jessica closed her laptop with a decisive snap. You know what? I think I need to review my original notes before we go any further. Really get back to the core vision before we start making changes. She was shutting me out. After months of picking my brain and stealing my work, she was finally getting suspicious enough to cut me off. Which meant I was running out of time to execute my plan. But as I packed up my things and headed for the door, Jessica called after me. Sarah? That text you got earlier. You sure it was just about rent? I turned back to her with my best confused smile. What else would it be? Her answering smile was sharp enough to cut steel. Nothing. Just checking. Monday morning felt like walking into a minefield. I'd spent the entire weekend replaying that final exchange with Jessica, analyzing every word and facial expression like I was studying enemy intelligence. The way she'd questioned me about David's text, the suspicious glint in her eyes, she was definitely onto something. I got to the office 20 minutes early, hoping to catch David before the usual chaos started. His corner office was already lit up, and through his glass door I could see him on the phone, gesturing animatedly with his free hand. When he spotted me hovering outside, he waved me in and quickly wrapped up his call. Sarah, perfect timing. Close the door and have a seat. The serious tone made my stomach clench. I perched on the edge of the chair across from his desk, trying to read his expression. David looked tired, stressed, and slightly annoyed, never a good combination. So, he began, leaning back in his chair. I got an interesting call on Saturday morning. From Rebecca Chan at Hartwell Industries. My blood turned to ice water. Rebecca was the head of marketing at Hartwell, the woman who'd been leading the applause for Jessica's presentation last week. Apparently, David continued, Rebecca was so impressed with Jessica's campaign that she decided to do a little research into our agency's previous work. She wanted to see if we'd done other campaigns with similar innovative approaches. Oh fuck. Oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck. She came across some interesting portfolio pieces on our website, including your Zenith Electronics rebrand from 6 months ago. David's eyes narrowed slightly. Rebecca found the strategic framework remarkably similar to what Jessica presented. The consumer psychology approach, the demographic targeting methodology, even some of the specific language around nostalgia marketing. I felt like I was free-falling. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. My plan had been to systematically expose Jessica's lies, not get caught up in some client-initiated investigation that could implicate me too. David, I can explain. He held up a hand to stop me. I'm not done. Rebecca also mentioned that she'd worked with Blackstone Creative 2 years ago, Jessica's previous agency. She specifically remembered asking them to pitch a nostalgia-based campaign for a different product line. They declined, said they didn't have anyone with expertise in that particular area of consumer psychology. The room felt like it was spinning. Rebecca Chan was unknowingly unraveling Jessica's entire web of lies, but she was also creating a trail that led directly back to me. Here's what I need to know, Sarah. David leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. How much of Jessica's presentation was actually your work? Before I could answer, there was a sharp knock on the door. Through the glass, I could see Jessica standing in the hallway, perfectly put together in a navy blazer and holding 2 coffee cups like peace offerings. Her smile was bright and confident, but I caught the flash of panic when she saw me sitting across from David's desk. Come in, Jessica, David called out. Actually, this timing is perfect. I was just discussing some questions that came up about the Hartwell campaign. Jessica entered the office with the careful grace of someone walking on thin ice. She handed David one of the coffees and shot me a look that was equal parts curious and threatening. Questions, she asked, settling into the chair next to mine. I thought the presentation went incredibly well. The client seemed thrilled with the concept. They were. They are, David confirmed. It's just that some interesting connections have come to light regarding the strategic approach. Sarah, why don't you tell Jessica about your previous work in nostalgia marketing? I felt Jessica's entire body tense beside me. The trap was closing, but I couldn't tell if I was the hunter or the prey anymore. The silence in David's office was deafening. I could feel Jessica's eyes burning into the side of my face, but I kept my gaze fixed on David, trying to buy myself a few precious seconds to figure out how to navigate this nightmare. Well, I began carefully. I've been researching nostalgic consumer behavior for about 8 months now. It started with the Zenith Electronics project, when we needed to understand why millennials were gravitating toward retro gaming systems. Jessica's coffee cup rattled slightly against its saucer as she set it down. That's so interesting, Sarah. You never mentioned having expertise in that area. The accusation in her voice was barely veiled, but David was watching our interaction like a hawk studying prey. I guess it never came up in our casual conversations, I replied sweetly. You know how it is, unless someone specifically asks about your research background, you don't really think to mention every project you're working on. Right, Jessica said, but her smile looked painted on. So when David asked me to develop the Hartwell campaign, I had no idea you were already working in that space. What are the odds? David's eyebrows shot up. Wait, Jessica. I didn't ask you to develop the Hartwell campaign. You came to me 3 weeks ago saying you had a breakthrough concept you wanted to pitch. Said you'd been developing it in your spare time. I watched Jessica's face cycle through approximately 17 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. She opened her mouth, closed it, then laughed in a way that sounded like she was choking on air. Of course. Sorry, I misspoke. I meant when I brought the concept to you, I didn't realize Sarah was working in the same area. Just, funny coincidence. But David wasn't letting it go. Sarah, you mentioned you've been researching this for 8 months. Have you developed any campaign concepts using nostalgia marketing? This was it. The moment where I could either expose Jessica completely or find a way to protect myself while still destroying her career. My heart was hammering so hard I was surprised they couldn't hear it. Actually, I said slowly, I did put together some preliminary concepts a few weeks ago. Nothing formal, just exploring different applications of the research. I was planning to develop them further when I had time. Preliminary concepts? David's tone sharpened. What kind of concepts? Jessica made a small noise that might have been a whimper. I turned to look at her directly for the first time since she'd entered the office, and the panic in her eyes was absolutely beautiful. Oh, you know, basic framework stuff. How to leverage childhood nostalgia triggers, the Saturday morning cartoon angle, that whole demographic approach. I paused, letting each word hit Jessica like a physical blow. But like I said, nothing formal. Just brainstorming notes. Brainstorming notes, David repeated thoughtfully. Do you still have these notes? Of course. They're on my computer. Timestamped and everything, you know how paranoid I am about backing up my work. The color drained from Jessica's face so completely I thought she might actually faint. She gripped the armrests of her chair like she was trying to anchor herself to reality. This is fascinating, David continued, seemingly oblivious to Jessica's distress. It sounds like you two were developing remarkably similar concepts independently. Almost identical approaches to the same marketing challenge. He leaned back in his chair, studying both of us with the intensity of someone trying to solve a particularly complex puzzle. In fact, it's so remarkably similar that I'm wondering if we should bring in Rebecca Chen to discuss the development timeline. She's very interested in understanding our creative process. Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Is that really necessary? Oh, I think it is, David said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Especially since she's considering expanding their contract with us based on the strength of this campaign. She wants to meet with the entire creative team next week. The trap had just snapped shut, and we were all caught inside it. The meeting with Rebecca Chen was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. 3 days to figure out how to survive what was shaping up to be a professional execution, mine, Jessica's, or possibly both of ours. I spent Tuesday morning staring at my computer screen, pretending to work on other projects while actually spiraling into full panic mode. Every scenario I played out in my head ended badly. If I admitted the campaign was originally mine, I'd look vindictive and unprofessional for not speaking up sooner. If I stayed quiet, I'd be complicit in Jessica's fraud when the truth inevitably came out. And if Jessica decided to throw me under the bus to save herself. Sarah. Marcus appeared at my cubicle with 2 cups of coffee and a concerned expression. You look like you haven't slept in a week. What's going on? I glanced around the office. Jessica was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding in the bathroom having her own breakdown, or maybe plotting my demise in conference room B. Hypothetically, I whispered, if you knew someone was taking credit for your work, but exposing them would also make you look bad, what would you do? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Hypothetically, I'd probably document everything I could to cover my own ass, then find a way to let the truth come out naturally instead of forcing it. Before I could respond, my email pinged with a message that made my stomach drop into my shoes. From Rebecca.Chen@HartwellIndustries.com. Subject, Campaign Development Questions. Hi Sarah. David mentioned you have extensive background in nostalgia marketing research. I'd love to review your preliminary work ahead of our meeting Thursday. Could you send over those brainstorming notes you mentioned? I'm particularly interested in seeing the development timeline for the consumer psychology framework *. Looking forward to our conversation. *best. Rebecca *. Oh shit, Marcus muttered, reading over my shoulder. That's not hypothetical anymore, is it? I forwarded Rebecca's email to my personal account and started gathering every file, every note, every scrap of evidence that proved the campaign's origin. Timestamps, research documents, draft presentations, everything I'd need to prove my case if this turned into a full-scale investigation. But as I compiled the evidence, a darker realization started creeping in. Jessica wasn't going down without a fight, and she had weapons I hadn't considered. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Coffee? We need to talk. J*. I found Jessica at a Starbucks 3 blocks from the office, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a bendy something or other like it was a lifeline. She'd clearly been crying, her usually perfect makeup was smudged, and her power blazer looked wrinkled. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down across from her. Her voice was hoarse, defeated. I know you probably hate me right now. That's putting it mildly. Jessica flinched but pressed on. Look, I know how this looks. I know what you're thinking. But it's not what you think. Really? I leaned back in my chair. Because what I think is that you've been systematically stealing my work for months, lying about your qualifications, and manipulating your way into a promotion that should have been mine. You're right about some of that, she admitted, staring into her coffee. My resume, there are some embellishments. And I did use your research without permission. But Sarah, you have to understand, I'm drowning here. I almost laughed. You're drowning? You got the promotion. You got the credit. You're living in a fucking penthouse while I'm eating ramen for dinner. It's not a penthouse, it's a rental, and I can barely afford it. Jessica's voice cracked. My dad co-signed the lease because he thinks I'm this hotshot marketing executive, but I'm 3 months behind on payments. My student loans are in default. I haven't been able to send money home to my mom in 6 months, and she's depending on me to help with my little sister's college tuition. The desperation in her voice sounded genuine, but I wasn't about to fall for a sob story. So your solution was to steal from me? I was going to give you credit, she said quietly. After I got established, after I proved myself, I was going to make sure you got recognition for your research. But then David started talking about the promotion, and Rebecca Chen got involved, and everything spiraled so fast. Bullshit. Jessica looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I have emails, Sarah. From our brainstorming sessions. Messages where you offered to help me develop campaign concepts. Casual conversations where we discussed collaborative work. My blood ran cold. What are you saying? I'm saying that if this turns into a he said she said situation, I have documentation that makes our collaboration look consensual. Official. Like we were working as a team and you're just trying to take sole credit now that the campaign is successful. The coffee shop suddenly felt too hot, too crowded, too loud. Jessica had been planning this, not just stealing my work, but creating a paper trail that would protect her when the truth came out. You manipulative, calculating. I'm trying to save both of us. Jessica interrupted. Rebecca Chen is going to tear this whole thing apart on Thursday. But if we present a united front, if we say the campaign was a true collaboration, we can both come out of this intact. I stared at her across the small table, realizing that Jessica Martinez was far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. And I was running out of time to figure out how to beat her at her own game. The walk back to the office felt like a death march. Jessica's threat kept echoing in my head. She had emails, documentation, evidence that could paint me as a vindictive colleague trying to steal credit from a collaborative project. I'd been so focused on exposing her lies that I'd completely underestimated her ability to manipulate the narrative. But as I badged into the building, something Marcus had said earlier clicked into place. Let the truth come out naturally instead of forcing it. Jessica might have emails showing our brainstorming sessions, but she didn't have everything. I spent the rest of Tuesday afternoon digging through my computer files with forensic precision. Every document, every timestamp, every auto-saved version of my original research. What I found was better than I'd hoped for. My original campaign concept had been created 3 weeks before my first brainstorming session with Jessica. The metadata on my files told the whole story, research documents from 2 months ago, draft presentations from January, consumer psychology notes going back to December. Jessica's supposed collaborative emails all came weeks after I'd already fully developed the concept. But the real smoking gun was something Jessica couldn't have anticipated, my obsessive habit of emailing rough drafts to my personal account for backup. Timestamps don't lie, and I had a trail of messages to myself showing the campaign's evolution from initial concept to final presentation, all predating any interaction with Jessica by weeks. Wednesday morning, I scheduled a meeting with David. Not to throw Jessica under the bus directly, but to present what Marcus would call natural truth. I've been thinking about tomorrow's meeting with Rebecca, I told David, settling into the chair across from his desk. I realized I should probably walk her through my complete research timeline, since she seemed interested in the development process. Good thinking, David nodded. What kind of timeline are we looking at? I pulled out a folder, not the Jessica's Greatest Hits compilation I'd prepared earlier, but something far more professional. A clean, chronological documentation of my work dating back 4 months. Well, the initial consumer psychology research started in December, I began, sliding the first document across his desk. I was exploring how childhood nostalgia influences purchasing decisions in the 28 to 35 demographic. David scanned the document, noting the date stamps. This was for the Zenith project? Originally, yes. But I realized the applications were much broader. I handed him the next document. By January, I was developing frameworks for how different brands could leverage specific nostalgia triggers. His eyebrows raised as he read through my January research notes, the same psychological insights that had formed the backbone of the Hartwell campaign. This is remarkably thorough, Sarah. Thank you. The campaign concept itself came together in early February. I placed my original draft presentation on his desk, the one with my name in the footer and timestamps that couldn't be faked. I was planning to propose it for the Hartwell account, but then Jessica mentioned she had some ideas she wanted to develop, so I held off. David went very still as he opened the presentation file. It was identical to what Jessica had pitched last week, down to the Saturday morning cartoon examples and the specific demographic data points. But this version was dated February 8th, 2 full weeks before Jessica's first collaborative email to me. Sarah, David said slowly, not looking up from the screen. When exactly did you and Jessica start collaborating on this concept? Well, she reached out on February 22nd asking if I had any insights into millennial consumer behavior. I thought she was just looking for general research guidance. I pulled out printed copies of our email chain, highlighting the dates. I was happy to share my findings, of course. I had no idea she was developing a campaign proposal. David's jaw was getting tighter with each document I showed him. The evidence was overwhelming, presented not as an accusation but as a helpful timeline for Rebecca Chen's benefit. Jessica's collaboration looked exactly like what it was, a systematic extraction of information from someone too naive to protect their work. I assume Jessica will have her own documentation from the development process, I added innocently. It'll be interesting to see how our timelines compare. David closed the presentation file and looked at me directly. Sarah, I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you believe Jessica knowingly appropriated your work? This was the moment. I could destroy Jessica completely with a single word. But Marcus was right, the truth was already speaking for itself. I said carefully, that Jessica is a very ambitious person who saw an opportunity and took it. Whether she intended to give me credit eventually, I'll never know. But I do think Rebecca Chen deserves to understand exactly how this campaign was developed. David nodded grimly. She certainly does. As I walked back to my desk, I caught sight of Jessica in conference room B, frantically typing on her laptop. She looked up as I passed, and our eyes met through the glass wall. Her expression told me she knew exactly what had just happened. The game had changed, and this time I was winning. Thursday morning arrived like a storm front, heavy with tension and the promise of destruction. I got to the office early again, but this time Jessica was already there, stationed at her desk like a sentry. She'd clearly been crying, even her expensive concealer couldn't hide the puffiness around her eyes. The moment I sat down, my phone buzzed with a text from her, *we need to talk. Now, *. I ignored it and opened my laptop, but Jessica wasn't taking silence for an answer. She appeared at my cubicle within minutes, her usual polished exterior cracking at the edges. What did you show David yesterday? She whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Just my research timeline, I replied without looking up from my screen. You know, the documentation Rebecca requested. Jessica's laugh was bitter and sharp. Your research timeline. Right. And I suppose it just happens to make me look like a thief? The timeline speaks for itself. Bullshit. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. You orchestrated this whole thing. The fake research data at my apartment, the sudden interest in helping with the follow-up presentation, playing dumb about your background in nostalgia marketing. You've been planning this from the beginning. I finally looked up at her, and the fury in her eyes was actually impressive. Jessica might be a liar and a plagiarist, but she wasn't stupid. She'd figured out that I'd been manipulating her just as much as she'd been manipulating me. I have no idea what you're talking about, I said calmly. Really? Because I spent all night going through our interactions, and it's amazing how you managed to ask exactly the right questions to make me panic. How you pushed me toward making mistakes. Her smile was razor sharp. You're not the innocent little victim you're pretending to be, Sarah. You're just as calculating as I am. Before I could respond, David's voice cut across the office. Jessica, Sarah, conference room A. Now. My stomach lurched. The meeting with Rebecca wasn't scheduled for another 3 hours. This felt like an emergency tribunal, and from the grim expression on David's face, someone was about to be executed professionally. We filed into the conference room in tense silence. David closed the door and activated the privacy glass, never a good sign. He sat across from us with a manila folder that I suspected contained my timeline documentation from yesterday. I've been doing some additional research since our conversation, David began, his tone carefully neutral. I reached out to a few colleagues to get some perspective on the situation we're facing. Jessica's hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. I spoke with Janet Morrison this morning. David paused, letting the significance sink in. Janet Morrison was our CEO, the final authority on everything that happened at Morrison & Associates. She's very concerned about the potential implications for our reputation if questions arise about our creative process. My mouth went dry. This had escalated far beyond a simple dispute between colleagues. We were now in corporate crisis management territory. She's also concerned, David continued, about some discrepancies I discovered in our personnel files. Jessica, would you like to explain why your Northwestern transcripts show a communications degree when your resume claims a master's in marketing analytics? The blood drained from Jessica's face so fast I thought she might collapse. But before she could answer, David turned to me with an expression that made my heart stop. And Sarah, would you like to explain why you've been conducting unauthorized background checks on your colleagues using company resources? The room tilted sideways. Somehow, they'd discovered my research into Jessica's credentials. My carefully planned revenge was about to destroy both of our careers, and Rebecca Chen's meeting was still 3 hours away. We were both fucked. The silence in the conference room was so thick you could suffocate on it. David sat there with his arms crossed, waiting for an answer I didn't have. How could I possibly explain that I'd been digging into Jessica's background without sounding like a vindictive psychopath? I started, then stopped. Every possible explanation sounded worse than the last. The IT department flagged unusual database access from your login, David continued, his voice getting colder by the second. Academic verification requests, employment history searches, even attempts to access personnel files. What exactly were you trying to accomplish, Sarah? Jessica was staring at me with a mixture of shock and what almost looked like admiration. Even in her own moment of exposure, she was probably impressed by the depth of my scheming. I was trying to verify information, I said finally, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. There were inconsistencies in things Jessica had told me about her background, and I wanted to understand. Inconsistencies? David's eyebrows shot up. Or were you building a case to discredit your colleague? Before I could answer, Jessica found her voice. David, I can explain about my resume. Some of the information is outdated. I was planning to update it to reflect my actual qualifications. Outdated? David opened the manila folder and pulled out what looked like Jessica's original job application. You claimed to have led campaigns that generated millions in revenue. You listed a master's degree you don't have. This isn't outdated, Jessica, it's fraudulent. My phone buzzed against my leg. A text message. Then another one. I tried to ignore it, but the buzzing was relentless. Finally, I glanced down discreetly. Asterisk Marcus, emergency. Rebecca Chan is here. Early. Looking for you both, asterisk. Asterisk Marcus, she has someone with her. Lawyer maybe, asterisk. Marcus, David's assistant is freaking out. My blood turned to ice. Rebecca wasn't supposed to be here until this afternoon. Why would she arrive early with a lawyer? David, I interrupted, my voice cracking slightly. I think we have a bigger problem. Before he could ask what I meant, his office phone started ringing through the conference room speaker. His assistant's voice came through, high-pitched with barely controlled panic. David? Rebecca Chen from Hartwell is here with their legal counsel. She says it's urgent regarding the campaign intellectual property rights. They're asking about timeline documentation and want to speak with both Sarah and Jessica immediately. The folder slipped from David's hands, papers scattering across the conference table. His face went from stern authority figure to someone realizing his company might be about to face a lawsuit. Intellectual property rights? Jessica whispered, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, she looked genuinely terrified rather than just caught. David was already standing, straightening his tie with the mechanical precision of someone going into damage control mode. They're in reception? Conference room B, his assistant replied. Should I tell them you'll be right there, or? Give us 5 minutes, David cut her off, then turned to face Jessica and me with an expression that could have frozen hell. I need to know right now, is there anything else about this situation that could expose this company to legal liability? Jessica opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked like she was drowning in slow motion. And that's when I realized the horrible truth. Rebecca Chen wasn't here about our internal drama. She was here because someone had reached out to Hartwell Industries directly. Someone who knew about the campaign theft and had decided to escalate this beyond our company's walls. My phone buzzed again. One more text message that made everything click into place. Asterisk unknown number, thought you should know, I forwarded our conversation to Hartwell's legal team. Professional thieves shouldn't get away with it. Good luck. A friend asterisk. Someone had been watching our entire battle unfold. And they just turned it into a war. David's face went from red to ashen as the implications hit him. Someone outside the company contacted Hartwell directly? I stared at the anonymous text, my mind racing through everyone who could have known enough details to involve lawyers. Marcus knew something was happening, but he wouldn't have escalated it externally. Jessica's friends from other departments? Unlikely. Then it hit me like a freight train. Marcy, I whispered. What? Jessica snapped. Marcy from HR. She must have noticed me accessing personnel files, put together the pieces about what I was investigating. My hands were shaking as I held up my phone. She probably thought she was protecting the company by giving Hartwell a heads up about potential fraud. David sank back into his chair like someone had punctured his spine. Jesus Christ. Do you realize what this means? If Hartwell thinks we knowingly presented stolen work, they could sue us for fraud, breach of contract, damages to their brand reputation. Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. How much could they sue for? Their contract with us is worth $2 million annually, David said flatly. But if they claim reputational damage or that they made business decisions based on fraudulent presentations? We could be looking at tens of millions. The room felt like it was closing in around us. This had spiraled so far beyond my original plan for petty revenge that I couldn't even see where it had started anymore. I'd wanted to expose Jessica and reclaim credit for my work. Instead, I potentially destroyed the entire company. Okay, David said, standing up and pacing behind his chair. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to walk into that conference room, and we're going to present a united front. Jessica, you're going to take full responsibility for the resume discrepancies, call them embellishments, not fraud. Sarah, you're going to explain that the campaign was collaborative work that got miscommunicated in the presentation. But that's not, I started. I don't give a shit what's true anymore. David's professional composure finally cracked completely. I care about keeping this company from getting sued into bankruptcy. Rebecca Chan has lawyers with her, which means they've already decided this is a legal matter, not a business discussion. Jessica was hyperventilating, her designer blazer rising and falling rapidly as she struggled to breathe. I can't do this. I can't lie to lawyers. What if they already know everything? What if Marcy told them about the personnel file searches and the timeline discrepancies and... Then we're all fucked, David cut her off brutally. But if there's any chance of salvaging this situation, it requires both of you to act like professional adults instead of vindictive children. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from an unknown number with a New York area code. I declined it, but immediately it started ringing again. Answer it, David ordered. If it's a reporter or another client who's heard about this, I need to know now. I accepted the call with trembling fingers. Hello? Sarah Martinez? The voice was crisp, professional, unfamiliar. This is Sarah Thompson. My apologies. This is Kevin Walsh from Hartwell Industries Legal Department. We're currently in your building meeting with your management team. I need to inform you that you may want to consider independent legal representation for the conversation we're about to have. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the conference table. David and Jessica stared at it like it was a bomb that had just started ticking. They're recommending I get a lawyer, I whispered. David closed his eyes and pressed his palms against them. We're not walking into a business meeting. We're walking into an interrogation. The three of us sat in that conference room for what felt like hours but was probably only 60 seconds, staring at my phone like it might explode. The silence was broken by David's assistant's voice crackling through the intercom again, higher pitched than before. David? They're asking if you need more time, but Ms. Chen says they have a flight to catch at 6, so. We'll be right there, David replied, his voice hollow. He looked at Jessica and me like a general about to send troops into a battle they couldn't win. Remember, united front. Whatever personal issues you two have with each other, they don't exist for the next hour. But as we stood to leave, Jessica grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into my blazer as she pulled me back. Wait. Her voice was steadier now, like she'd found some reserve of strength in her desperation. Sarah, before we walk into that room, I need you to know something. David paused at the door, clearly torn between curiosity and the need to not keep lawyers waiting any longer than we already had. What? I asked, though part of me didn't want to hear whatever bombshell Jessica was about to drop. The anonymous tip to Hartwell? It wasn't Marcy from HR. Jessica's grip on my arm tightened. I know who it was, and when this meeting is over, you're going to want to kill them. Who? David and I asked simultaneously. Jessica's laugh was bitter and sharp. Think about it. Who else knew enough details about our situation to contact Hartwell directly? Who had access to all the timeline information, the resume discrepancies, the personnel file searches? My mind raced through the possibilities, but I kept hitting dead ends. Marcus wouldn't have betrayed me. David's assistant didn't know the full scope. The IT department would have gone through proper channels. Marcus, Jessica said, watching my face carefully. Your cubicle buddy who's been watching this whole drama unfold like it's his personal soap opera. That's impossible. Marcus would never. Wouldn't he? Jessica pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of a LinkedIn message. He reached out to me Tuesday night. Said he was concerned about the ethical implications of the situation and thought the client deserved to know the full truth. I ignored it, but apparently he decided to go directly to the source. The conference room tilted sideways. Marcus, who'd been bringing me coffee and offering advice, who'd seemed so supportive of my situation, had been the one to blow everything up. But why? He's been passed over for promotion 3 times, Jessica continued, apparently reading my mind. Always lost out to people he thought were less qualified. Maybe he saw this as his chance to play corporate whistleblower, clean house of all the unethical employees. David was checking his watch with increasing agitation. This is fascinating, but we have lawyers waiting who are probably charging Hartwell $500 an hour to sit in our conference room. But I couldn't move. The betrayal hit differently than Jessica's theft. Marcus had been my ally, my confidant. I'd trusted him with my fears and frustrations, and he'd used that information to torch both our careers in some misguided attempt at corporate justice. There's more, Jessica said quietly. The LinkedIn message mentioned specific details about your personnel file searches. Details I never told him. Which means he's been monitoring my computer activity, I finished, the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. Probably taking screenshots, documenting everything for his little whistleblower case. David yanked the door open with enough force to rattle the glass walls. I don't care if Marcus is secretly working for the FBI. We have exactly 30 seconds to get our stories straight before we walk into that room, or Morrison and Associates is going to be a very expensive memory. As we walked down the hallway toward conference room B, I caught a glimpse of Marcus at his desk, typing furiously on his computer. When he looked up and saw our procession heading toward the legal meeting, his expression wasn't guilt or concern. It was satisfaction. The bastard was actually proud of what he'd done. Conference room B felt like a courtroom. Rebecca Chen sat at the head of the table in a sharp gray suit, flanked by 2 men in darker suits who radiated the kind of quiet menace that only comes with law degrees and billable hours. Their briefcases were open, revealing stacks of documents that looked disturbingly comprehensive for a meeting that was supposed to be about a simple campaign presentation. Please, sit, Rebecca said, her tone polite but arctic. The warmth from last week's enthusiastic applause had evaporated completely. I believe you know why we're here. David took the lead, settling into damage control mode with practiced corporate smoothness. Rebecca, I want to assure you that any concerns about our creative process can be easily clarified. We pride ourselves on transparency and professional integrity. Do you? The lawyer on Rebecca's left, Kevin Walsh, I assumed, based on the phone call, opened a manila folder with deliberate precision. Because we've received some troubling information about the campaign development timeline. My mouth went completely dry. They weren't fishing for information. They already had it. We understand there may have been some confusion about collaborative work, David continued, but Kevin held up a hand to stop him. Mr. Morrison, with respect, we're not here to discuss collaboration. We're here to discuss fraud. Kevin pulled out a document and slid it across the table. This is a chronological breakdown of digital communications, file creation dates, and personnel record access logs. All provided by someone within your organization who was concerned about ethical violations. Jessica made a small choking sound beside me. Even David's professional composure cracked as he scanned the document. It was exactly what Marcus had threatened, a comprehensive timeline that laid out the entire scheme in black and white. As you can see, Kevin continued, Ms. Martinez presented work on February 28 that was originally created by Ms. Thompson on February 8. The personnel file investigations began March 1, suggesting premeditated research into credentials fraud. And the subsequent attempts to manipulate the follow-up presentation indicate ongoing conspiracy to conceal the theft. Conspiracy? Jessica's voice cracked on the word. Rebecca finally spoke, her words clipped and precise. Hartwell Industries has built our reputation on authentic partnerships with ethical agencies. We've already begun discussing this situation with our board of directors and our public relations team. The implications hit like a sledgehammer. They weren't just threatening to sue us, they were preparing to destroy our reputation publicly. In the advertising world, that was a death sentence. However, Rebecca continued, and I caught the slightest hint of negotiation in her tone. We're prepared to handle this quietly if we can reach an appropriate resolution. David leaned forward like a drowning man spotting a life preserver. What kind of resolution? Full termination of the employees involved in the fraud. A comprehensive review of all work produced by this agency over the past 2 years. And Rebecca paused, consulting her notes, a 50% reduction in our contract fees for the remainder of our agreement, to compensate for the resources we've expended investigating this matter. The numbers hit David visibly. 50% of $2 million annually, plus the cost of the comprehensive review, plus losing 2 employees. We weren't just talking about Jessica and me getting fired, we were talking about potential layoffs across the entire agency. And if we don't agree to these terms? David asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. Kevin Walsh smiled, and it was absolutely terrifying. Then we'll be filing formal complaints with the Better Business Bureau, the American Advertising Federation, and pursuing civil litigation for fraudulent misrepresentation. We'll also be sharing our findings with other agencies in the city, to protect them from similar issues. I felt Jessica grab my hand under the table, her palm slick with sweat. For all our antagonism, we were going down together, and she knew it. But as I sat there watching our careers implode in real time, one thought kept nagging at me. Marcus's timeline was too perfect, too comprehensive. He hadn't just stumbled onto this information, he'd been collecting it systematically. Which meant this meeting wasn't the end of his plan. It was just the beginning. The realization hit me like lightning as I stared at Marcus through the conference room's glass wall. He wasn't just documenting our drama for some misguided sense of justice, he was positioning himself as the ethical hero who exposed corporate fraud. This wasn't about right and wrong. This was about Marcus finally getting his moment to shine. Excuse me, I said suddenly, standing up from the table. I need to clarify something important. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Ms. Thompson, I don't think. Marcus Chen, I said, the pieces clicking together so fast I could barely keep up. Your informant. He's your nephew, isn't he? The color drained from Rebecca's face. Kevin Walsh's pen stopped moving. Jessica's hand went limp in mine. I'm sorry? Rebecca's voice was carefully controlled, but I could see the panic in her eyes. Marcus Chen. My cubicle neighbor who's been so helpfully documenting everything. Chen is a common last name, but the way you both tilt your head when you're thinking, the same nervous habit of clicking pens. Plus, he's been passed over for promotion 3 times despite having an MBA from Northwestern. The same Northwestern that Jessica lied about attending. David was staring at me like I'd lost my mind, but I was just getting started. How much did he tell you about his noble whistleblowing, Rebecca? Did he mention that he's been systematically documenting employee computer activity without authorization? Or that he planted the idea for me to investigate Jessica's background in the first place? That's ridiculous, Marcus's voice came from behind us. He'd apparently abandoned his desk to eavesdrop, and now stood in the doorway looking like someone had just set him on fire. I was protecting the company's integrity. Were you? I pulled out my phone and opened my text history. Because I have messages here where you specifically suggested I do some research into Jessica's qualifications. You fed me the idea to look into her credentials, then documented me doing exactly what you suggested. Jessica was staring at Marcus with dawning horror. You orchestrated this entire thing. Marcus, David's voice was dangerously quiet. Is this true? Marcus straightened his shoulders, trying to maintain some dignity. Someone had to expose the corruption in this agency. Sarah and Jessica were just symptoms of a larger problem. The larger problem being that you keep getting passed over for promotions? I stood up, everything finally making sense. So you decided to eliminate the competition by setting us up to destroy each other. Rebecca was frantically whispering with her lawyers. Kevin Walsh looked like he'd just realized his airtight case had evaporated. The timeline, David said slowly. Marcus compiled the timeline. Which means he could have manipulated the data to make the situation look worse than it was. Marcus's face went bright red. I didn't manipulate anything. I just documented what I observed. What you orchestrated, I corrected. You knew Jessica had lied on her resume, probably researched it the same way you researched everyone else who got promoted ahead of you. You knew I was working on nostalgia marketing research. So you introduced us, suggested we collaborate, then sat back and watched us implode while documenting everything for your aunt's legal team. The silence in the room was deafening. Rebecca looked mortified, the lawyers looked confused, and David looked like he was calculating how many wrongful termination lawsuits he was about to face. Rebecca, David said finally, I think we need to discuss this situation privately. Without any family members involved. Marcus backed out of the doorway as Rebecca closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I think, she said quietly, we need to completely restart this conversation. 2 hours later, Jessica and I walked out of the building together, not fired, not sued, and somehow still employed. Marcus, however, was cleaning out his desk under the supervision of security. So, Jessica said as we reached the sidewalk, are we good now? I looked at her, still a liar, still a plagiarist, but also the only other person who understood exactly how close we'd both come to losing everything. We're good, I said. But I'm keeping my research notes password protected from now on. Jessica laughed, and for the first time in weeks, it sounded genuine. Deal. And Sarah? That was fucking brilliant in there. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting the real villain expose themselves.